The single biggest challenge we face today is operational, and that's operational caused by the problems of the Pratt & Whitney 1100 engines. They're the engines that are on the Airbus Neo fleet. I guess one can never absolutely guarantee an ideal timing, but I think what we would say is that February 2024 was very good timing. As from now, we will have a potentially much more generous dividend policy, as I say, reflective of the performance of the airline and the strength of the balance sheet. We also have to remember that, roughly speaking, 2/3 of the cost of an airline, any airline, are denominated in dollars or dollar equivalents. It is something I think that all of the various stakeholders here, the airlines, Kazmanagas' partner, CNPC, and the government needs to focus on quite clearly if we are to meet these targets. We would absolutely encourage any young men and women who are listening to this podcast, who have a passion for flying, to apply for the program. Fly Aerostan continues to make its own commercial decisions based on its own evaluation. It remains 100% subsidiary of the Air Astana Group of Air Astana. And of course, wherever we can, we try and achieve synergies between the two airlines.
Will you stay forever with Air Astana Group?
Well, so forever is a long time, of course. And as we say, man makes plans and God laughs. Anybody makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. The point is to recognize them, report them, and correct them.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Business Insight, where we bring you conversations with the leaders shaping industries and transforming the way we connect with the world. Today, we are honored to be joined by a true pioneer in aviation, the president and CEO of Air Astana, Kazakhstan's national carrier and one of the Central Asia's most respected airlines. Under his leadership since 2005, Air Astana has grown from a regional newcomer into a world-class airline recognized for safety, service, and operational excellence. Today, we will be discussing the evolution of Air Astana, the challenges and opportunities, and what it takes to lead the national airline in ever-changing world. Please welcome the President and CEO of Air Astana, Mr. Peter Foster. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Estelle.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I think that we are ready to start, and I'd like to kick off our discussions with the first question, which is on the performance of the Air Astana. Today, you are announcing your mid-year results, and the company showed strong growth in revenues and profitability, with a notable increase in EBITDA and a significant rise in cash reserves. The company also saw an increase in available seat kilometers and revenue passenger kilometers, indicating strong operational performance. I'm not an expert in aviation, but I know I get prepared to our interview. How do you see, as a CEO, the results of the company? And are there any areas which you think the company could do better and add to the strong performance of the company?
Yes, thank you, Estelle, for inviting me. We have had a good first half. As you say, the indicators are all positive. We have an increase in passengers, an increase in EBITDA, an increase in revenues, and therefore the increases are in line with our expectations. And this is obviously gratifying for us. And we're grateful to the support, of course, obviously of the travelling public. I think your question is, what are the areas
where you could do better? As a company.
The single biggest challenge we face today is operational, and that's operational caused by the problems of the Pratt & Whitney 1100 engines. They're the engines that are on the Airbus Neo fleet. They have undergone a series of major issues and setbacks, technical setbacks, since they were introduced by Air Astana in November 2016. The engine, in fact, started flying a year before that for other airlines. We have a significant number of aircraft that are grounded because of these problems. Just to put this in perspective, more than 600 aircraft are grounded worldwide by this problem. So it's not only Air Astana's problem, but it is a significant problem. It has resulted in a number of aircraft not being able to fly this year. And had they been able to fly, we would have been able to grow at a faster rate that we have hitherto been able to achieve. So I think that's really the biggest single issue that we face today.
Before we go to with the other performance and not only questions, I propose we discuss the IPO of Air Astana.
Sure.
To our view, the IPO of Air Astana was exceptional for many reasons. It was the most anticipated IPO and the biggest, at least for the last 7 years. And we also, with your support, introduced first conditional trading in Kazakhstani market. However, some analysts believe that timing for the IPO was not kind of ideal. I know you've been addressing or commenting on that issue numerous times, but let's try to wrap it up here. What is your view on the IPO, and what are your conclusions in general?
Well, the IPO was first discussed back in 2018-19, so it's an issue that had been under a great deal of discussion for many years. Originally, the IPO was to have happened in 2020, and then, of course, obviously COVID got in the way, and that couldn't happen. So there is a lot of history behind the evolution of the IPO. It's very difficult to comment on the timing of any IPO because they happen after a process of preparation.
It depends on the market.
Yeah, a process of preparation and, of course, obviously market conditions. So I guess one can never absolutely guarantee an ideal timing, but I think what we would say is that February 2024 was very good timing. As I say, we had fully recovered, the industry had fully recovered from the problems of 2020 and COVID. Then, of course, there was the shock of the Ukrainian war in 2022, and, of course, obviously the events that took place here as well prior to that. So 2024, we would say, was a good time to do the IPO, and I think that's been vindicated by virtue of the fact that since the IPO happened in February of last year, we have now had 6 consecutive quarters of growth and good performance. Of course, the IPO raised $120 million of capital for the company's future expansion, so that was very successful. So our argument would be that the timing was, in fact, good. And that the IPO itself was a great success.
And the buyback exercise which you have done, was it to stabilize the share price, and what was the reason behind that?
The primary reason behind the buyback was to acquire a sufficient number of shares to satisfy the employee share option program.
Okay.
And yes, that was achieved. The first tranche was completed as planned. There is another tranche underway at the moment.
Okay, that's good. And I hope it will be done on AIX. Okay, and can you tell a bit about your dividend policy? I think that undergoes some changes.
Yes. So the 2024 was a strong year. and therefore we paid the dividend a couple of months ago. We paid the dividend on the basis of the 2024 results. We paid at the maximum of the range that we had published in the prospectus, which was 20%. By virtue of the good result and the very strong balance sheet, we also made a special dividend payment that was on top of the maximum of the range, which, as you say, was 20% of net income. So, yes, that's the history of the latest dividend.
Okay. And any plans for future, any changes to the range?
Yes, yes. I mean, in light of the strong result and the strong balance sheet, we decided to revise the dividend policy. So, as I'd mentioned, the dividend policy hitherto was stated on the basis of a maximum of 20% of net income. We have revised that going forward to introduce a range, and that range will go from 30 to 50% of net income, and that will be based starting on the 2025 results.
So to be paid in 2026.
Exactly. So as from now, we will have a potentially much more generous dividend policy, as I say, reflective of the performance of the airline and the strength of the balance sheet.
Okay, good. I'd like to go further to another key factor for the operational performance of the company, which is the variety of flight destinations.
Yes.
In the current geopolitical situation, it might be not easy to navigate and to make decisions on new directions and routes. Can you comment on the implications of the geopolitical situation on the business of the company and your projections on the results in that respect?
Yes, geopolitics is having a much more disruptive effect on the aviation industry now than it has for many, many years. In fact, if I look back on my own career, which goes back now 43 years. I think I can say without any doubt that the present geopolitical situation is having a significant effect on operations. And particularly this year, we have already seen significant disruptions from several events. We had the India Pakistan problem in May, and that caused the closure of the border between India and Pakistan, which of course is directly on the flight path of our flights to India. That was just after we launched our flights to Mumbai, so that was quite disruptive. Although that problem, although it's not been resolved politically, we are now able to fly that route.
Okay. So it's safe.
It's safe. It's completely safe. Of course, we can't be sure, given the volatility of the conflict between India and Pakistan. We can't be sure that that airspace will remain open. But for the time being, it remains open, and of course, it remains completely safe. Then, of course, obviously, there has been the conflict in the Middle East.
And you've been rescuing people from Dubai, as far as I remember.
Yes, well, unfortunately, when the conflict, of course, as we all know, is not new, but it did escalate with the missile attacks between the two countries in June. And yes, that did result in cancellations. It resulted in us being obliged to reroute flights around Iran, which was very disruptive and costly. As you say, we did, of course, have to send aircraft to the Gulf to bring back Kazakhstan passengers to Kazakhstan to here. That problem, again, appears to be temporarily resolved. We are now flying to Dubai on the direct route and to other points in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. But again, somewhat like the India and Pakistan situation, it of course remains very volatile, and there is a danger, of course, that it could
so you need to monitor.
escalate at any time. We have to monitor that very carefully. Latterly, of course, we've had the somewhat unexpected conflict between Thailand and Cambodia.
Yeah, right.
That also caused us to have to change the routing for various flights to Southeast Asia. So again, all of these things are disruptive. I would just stress that we manage the conflict very carefully. We have an internal security and safety unit. We use the best intelligence that is available to us to make decisions with regard to these flights. And if there's any risk whatsoever to passengers and crew and aircraft, of course we don't fly.
Mm-hmm. And are there any new routes you would like to tell to our audience?
Yes, we've had a few new routes this year. We've launched a route to Guangzhou in southern China. This is an important route for us, of course. Obviously, Guangzhou, the center of the Greater Bay Area, the industrial heartland, the driving force, the factory, if you like, of China, and therefore of much of the world's industry. So that's been a very positive development, and we have recently signed a codeshare agreement with the incumbent carrier in Guangzhou, which is China Southern Airways, which incidentally is one of the largest airlines in the world, with 971 aircraft. So that was a good development. We've launched flights to Mumbai, as I mentioned. We've launched several flights to different points in Vietnam. We flew to Phu Quoc, Cam Ranh, that's Nha Trang, and Da Nang. We have increased the number of domestic services and routes within Central Asia and the Caucasus. So notwithstanding the issues that we've just been talking about, we have nevertheless been able to expand the route network.
Okay, the next question is on ticket price. This is something which is always, the passengers or clients are complaining. And Air Astana is the most acclaimed airline in the region and holding numerous awards for high quality service and comfort on board. We understand that the reason behind the cost or the price of the ticket is the fuel surcharge. Are there any other components which affect the cost price, and is it difficult to keep prices at a low level?
Actually, we should just perhaps clarify one thing. The fuel surcharge has been entirely withdrawn from all domestic routes. So all the flights within Kazakhstan now, there are no flights within Kazakhstan that have a fuel surcharge. International flights do have a fuel surcharge, but again, this is absolutely standard practice, something that's been practiced by the industry now for many years. I think, on prices, of course, as we understand, this is a very important issue for the travelling public, and we fully appreciate and understand that. And of course, we're a business. We're a business in a competitive environment. We can't charge prices that are...
You're not a charity.
No, but the point is, what I meant by that is that we're a business in a competitive environment, and therefore we are very much driven by competitive pricing. Just to put this in context, there have been 20 new airlines coming into the Kazakhstan market during the course of the last 3 years from all parts of the world. And of course, many of those airlines are so-called low-cost airlines.
Right.
So it's a competitive marketplace. And therefore, our prices, to a large extent, are going to be driven by the market. And as we know, the Kazakhstan domestic market also is an open market. There are no monopolies. There are no barriers to entry other than financial and operational safety barriers, which are quite right, of course. We also have to remember that, roughly speaking, 2/3 of the cost of an airline, any airline, are denominated in dollars or dollar equivalents. Right. So this is aircraft, maintenance, insurance, fuel, spare parts, so on and so forth. These are all, if you like, international costs on the basis of international pricing, and that pricing is always in dollars. So when you have an airline, or rather when you have an industry where the cost base is largely in dollars, evidently prices are going to reflect that fact.
You need to make adjustments.
They're going to reflect that fact. Now, if you take Kazakhstan, like many domestic markets around the world, prices for tickets in Kazakhstan must, of course, be priced in the local currency, in our case, tenge. This is a common practice around the world, that prices for domestic routes, generally speaking, must be priced in the currency of the home country. I think we're all very familiar with the movement of the tenge over the course of the last 12 months and over the course of the last 6 months. So inevitably, in a dollar-denominated industry, when one is charging fares in a currency which is depreciating against that primary currency of the industry, inevitably there have to be price adjustments for us to continue to be able to cover those costs. That's on domestic routes. On international routes, I can tell you our prices have really not moved at all. In fact, in some cases, our prices have come down. As I say, very much driven by the efficiencies of the business, as well as the imperatives of the competition and the market.
Okay, we talked about a bit on the fuel price. As far as we know, you procure 2/3 of the aviation fuel domestically in Kazakhstan and 1/3 from offshore. And is it in terms of price, purchase price and quality comparable? I mean, these two.
Yes. Well, fundamentally, of course, the underlying commodity of aviation jet fuel is, of course, crude oil, and as we know, oil is priced in dollars. So fundamentally, the underlying commodity behind fuel is a dollar-denominated commodity, oil in this case. The only difference between Kazakhstan and the rest of the world, for us at any rate, is that for most of the rest of the world, there exists what is referred to as a Platts formula. Now, that formula is a fixed formula that establishes a fixed margin between the cost of oil and the price of jet fuel. So it's a fixed formula, and therefore the two move in tandem. When there is a movement in the price of crude oil, there is an immediate move in the price of jet fuel. A equivalent to the Platts formula does not exist in Kazakhstan. We tend to buy our fuel direct from the refineries, primarily, of course, although not exclusively, from the Shymkent refinery. Because there is not that formula, the price does not exactly track the international fuel movement, but it tends to follow it. So what happens is that the trend is largely the same. It's just that there is a time lag, either up or down, between the local fuel price and the foreign fuel price.
Okay, and also there were some news on Air Astana and Kazmunaygaz co-financing a pre-feasibility study on the production of and utilization of sustainable aviation fuel. Can you give us a status of that project? Where you
Yes, we did indeed. We have indeed been we are engaged in this study that has been sponsored by the EBRD. The EBRD actually is, as you know, is a 5% shareholder in Air Astana. There has indeed been a study into sustainable aviation fuel, SAF as we call it. There is a target of the industry to achieve 5% SAF by 2030. That's for the industry, which of course we subscribe to through both IATA and the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines, AAPA, of which we're an executive committee member. So that, if you like, is an overall target of the industry. As far as Kazakhstan's concerned, there is a step to get to before we get to SAF, and that's the conversion of jet fuel from TS1 fuel, which is the old Soviet fuel, of course. with the lower freezing temperature to Jet A1. Now, there's no technical reason why TS1 should continue to be used. Jet A1 would give us a great deal more flexibility in terms of where we acquire our fuel from. The proposal, if you like, or the initiative to switch from TS1 to Jet A1, at least partially, has been discussed now for, I think, about 12 or 13 years. I think it's a bit disappointing for us that it hasn't happened yet. We signed an MOU with CNPC. That's, of course, the partner, the Chinese partner in the Shymkent refinery. We signed an MOU, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. That there would be a partial conversion from TS1 to Jet A1, and that then there would be a move towards sustainable aviation fuel, which initially we would acquire from CNPC's SAF production unit in China. And then the idea was that would be migrated into Kazakhstan. I guess those developments have not taken place quite as quickly as we had anticipated, and it is something I think that all of the various stakeholders here, the airlines, KazMunayGas' partner, CNPC, and the government needs to focus on quite clearly if we are to meet these targets.
My next question is on Airbus maintenance, and I have a note here. In the news that in November 2024, for the first time in Kazakhstan, Air Astana successfully conducted technical maintenance on Airbus A320 aircraft. Now, Air Astana engineers have reached the required level of expertise to perform all forms of C checks in-house. This news is particularly striking given that no other provider in Central or Eurasian region can do the same. Is it something which you had to do, or it's a new business or revenue stream for you?
I think the answer to that, Estelle, is that it's both of those things. Okay. Again, this is something that we'd started discussing at least 10 years ago. When Air Astana was established, it was established with what we call a line maintenance operation. That's the relatively light checks that airlines are required to perform on a regular basis on their aircraft. Now, when Air Astana was established, it was established with what we call an EASA 145 license. That's a European license to do line maintenance from the very start. So we've done that since 2002. As I say, around 12 years ago, we started to consider the possibility of being able to do the heavier checks, referred to, as you quite rightly say, as the C checks. At that time, we realized that for several reasons we wanted to bring the C checks into Kazakhstan. Firstly, because it's very costly to send aircraft overseas to overseas maintenance organizations. Secondly, of course, there is a shortage of overseas maintenance facilities of the required standards. So one is always subject to the availability of those facilities. And thirdly, we were building up our capability, a strong team of engineers here in Kazakhstan, and we felt that we could do this. So, as you'll probably remember, we built a large hangar in Astana.
It is where your board of directors is taking place, right?
Yeah, that's right. You were very well informed. Yes, absolutely right. We started to perform C checks about 3 years ago. Now, C checks are the heavy checks. They happen once every 18 months, and they are graded by their extensiveness. So the first C check of an 18-month aircraft is a relatively mild C check, and they get progressively heavier as the aircraft goes through its aging cycle. And so the most extensive check is called a C12. This used to be referred to in the industry as a D check. And yes, you're quite right. As of late last year, we acquired the ability to perform C12 checks, and we have now just completed our third C12 check. So we are able to do all the checks required on the Airbus fleet.
Okay.
And as you rightly say, we are the only facility within this region that has the licenses, the full range of licenses to enable us to do this.
So does that mean you can accept other jets or aircraft for maintenance from other countries?
In theory, yes. In practice, we are limited by the size of the facility.
Oh, okay.
So we are just in the process, in fact, we're just about to break ground on a second hangar facility at Astana Airport. It's important to point out that this facility, we think, is not only crucial for Air Astana, but it is quite crucial for Kazakhstan as in terms of its positioning as an aviation centre, both technical and commercial. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we're working with the new owner-managers of Astana Airport to ensure that we can start to break ground on the second hangar as quickly as possible. It's very important that we do that. So at the moment, our facility is limited to our own aircraft by limitations of space. Once we have the second hangar, which is essential also for Air Astana as well, and therefore essential for the country, we will, of course, be looking to expand the footprint, the commercial footprint of the facility by offering third-party maintenance services to other airlines.
And it will affect, of course, your revenue streams. It will add to the performance of the company.
It will. I mean, it will. It will not be. It's unlikely that this is going to be a vast source of revenue
contributor
for the foreseeable future. But we're also expecting to be able to build a large hangar also in Almaty. We have the provision to build a third hangar in Astana on the land that we have leased for the next 50 years. And therefore, in time, it can indeed become a significant source of additional revenue. Okay. For the time being, it's primarily, of course, obviously for Air Astana's own fleet as we continue to grow that fleet.
Okay, and is it the same trend taking place in training your staff, the pilots? Are you having something in-house, so you do not need to send your cadets abroad to study or to train internationally and do it here in-house?
So yes, also at Astana, in fact on the same plot of land with which you're evidently very familiar. We don't have a boardroom in the training centre, but you probably knew that already. No, we installed a simulator a couple of years ago. We have a second simulator presently being installed. This is an Airbus simulator. It's a full motion simulator. It's fully licensed, of course. This simulator enables us to do what we call the recurrent training. Okay. That's the regular training that all pilots are legally obliged to undertake. Okay. On a regular basis. Up until a couple of years ago, those Airbus pilots were being sent again to overseas training facilities, overseas simulators. Again, the same problems existed there as existed with the MRO. In addition, of course, to the travel time for a pilot to and from. So that was quite disruptive and very expensive. Obviously, we can now do that in-house, which is a good thing. And we will be adding a second simulator very shortly. And again, we will be in a position at that time to offer recurrent training to other airlines. Okay. The recurrent training is separate from what we call the ab initio training. I think, Asel, you're familiar with that.
I like that word.
Yes, the ab initio is as what it says, of course. Yeah. We all understand what ab initio means. The ab initio training is a process whereby young people, young men and women, are selected by the airline and by the training centre in a joint selection process to go to training facilities for their initial commercial pilot's license. That's why they're referred to as cadets. So they're starting from effectively zero through to an ab initio program, whereby they emerge approximately 18 months later with a commercial pilot's license. In fact, it's actually called a frozen ATPL, but we don't have to go into detail on that. Then, armed with that commercial pilot's license, they then undergo what we call multi-crew training, and then they're assigned to a fleet. And then they undergo type rating training. That's to teach them specifically how to fly either an Airbus or a Boeing aircraft. And having undergone that process, they then come into the fleet as a first officer, as a trainee first officer, where they undergo line training. That's to say they're actually flying the aircraft as a first officer with a captain in the left-hand seat, but also with a training pilot who is sitting behind them, also in the cockpit. And they do that for a number of sectors, and then they're signed off, and then they have become first officers. So that's how that works. If I can just take a couple of minutes of your time to go into some detail on this. This is a very generous program. Air Astana pays the entire cost of this training program up front. Then, over the course of a career, the individual pilot is required to pay back half of that cost. But I stress that is with no interest and no escalation. And a career might last for 30 years. So really, when you amortize it over a 30-year period, really half the cost of the initial training is extremely modest. As I say, with no increases along the way. This is one of the most generous pilot training schemes operated by any airline in the world. And we currently get in the region of 20 to 30 successful candidates a year. It's not sufficient. We really need in the region of 40 to 50 to sustain the operation, which means we have to supplement the local pilots with foreign pilots. We would very much encourage young men and women, and I need to stress this is an equal opportunities profession. And we have now many female pilots flying for Air Astana. So we would like to encourage young men and women, who have a passion for flying, who have achieved a high level of educational achievement, who are motivated by the idea of a career in the airline industry. Air Astana, of course, is an excellent airline. Our pilots are well paid. It's a very stable career, and we would absolutely encourage any young men and women who are listening to this podcast, who have a passion for flying, to apply for the program.
And what is the percentage, just for curiosity purposes, what is the percentage of women and men in
It's still relatively small.
Not in the ab initio, but in the pilots.
In the total pilots, it's still relatively small. Of the more than 550 pilots that we employ, it's still a relatively small number of ladies, but that's increasing all the time.
Okay.
And as I say, we very much encourage ladies to consider this as a career.
Fly Air Astana is my next question. There were discussions around the company to be standalone or to be or remain a part of the Air Astana. And IATA recently just assigned a separate FS code for the airline. Can you tell us what is that? What is happening with that? Are you still consolidated, or it's already standalone? And how the relationship are built between two companies?
Yes, it's a it's a very important question. It's important to clarify that. So, when Fly Air Astana was established back in 2019, at that time it was just a division of Air Astana. It was flying under a KC flight code. And it was flying under Air Astana's Airline Operator Certificate, AOC as we call it. But it was always the intention that Fly Aerostan should operate on a commercial basis as a standalone commercial entity from Air Astana, because the low-cost model is quite different to the full-service model, as you know.
Yeah.
And so right from the start in 2019, Fly Aerostan had its own management team that have been taking their own commercial decisions. So, a selection of routes, where they want to fly, their pricing, so on and so forth. That has never changed. But of course, as Fly Aerostan grew, it was important that it be established as its own corporate entity. So we worked very hard to establish its own corporate profile, corporate identity, and of course its own AOC, which it did indeed achieve last year. And so as of this year, of course, it has been flying under a separate flight code, which, as you say, is FS, Foxtrot Sierra. So Fly Aerostan continues to make its own commercial decisions based on its own evaluation. It remains 100% subsidiary of the Air Astana group of Air Astana. And of course, wherever we can, we try and achieve synergies between the two airlines. So Fly Aerostan takes all of its maintenance from Air Astana. The pilots, we've just been talking about the pilots are pooled, so the pilots can fly on both Air Astana and Fly Aerostan. There are many other services, as you can imagine, across an airline, whereby Fly Aerostan can benefit from those economies of scale, those synergies. So that's really how it works. There are many synergies which enables both airlines to keep their costs down, but Fly Aerostan does take its own key commercial decisions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And I usually ask a question about family, but in your case, I'd like to structure it in a different way.
Yes, go ahead.
So your kids are studying in your homeland, and this naturally prompted some curiosity regarding your long-term plans as a CEO of Air Astana. So can you shed a light on that? What people should expect? Will you stay forever with Air Astana group?
Well, so forever is a long time, of course. And as we say, man makes plans and God laughs. But no, the decision, the family decision to have our children educated in the UK, starting with last year's scholastic year, was a family decision that had been taken, in fact, many years prior to the actual event. As you know, the waiting list for schools in the UK can be very long. There are many people in this country who have their children educated overseas. There are many Kazakh friends of mine, many of whom have their children in the UK being educated either at school or at university. So I don't think I'm alone in having my children educated in the UK. So I don't think this is particularly out of the norm for Kazakhstan. As far as as far as we're concerned as a family, this is a manageable process. School vacations from the UK tend to be quite long. In fact, they're here at the moment. So no, this is not an indication of any plans I may or may not have with regard to my career. I've been in this job now for 20 years. It's been a highly rewarding experience in so many ways. It's absolutely the peak of my professional career, and I have no plans to change that. Okay, good to know that. Thank you. My last but not the least question on values. How do they shape your decisions in both professional and personal life? Well, as far as my professional values are concerned, I had the great good fortune to spend the first 16 years of my career with Cathay Pacific of Hong Kong. Cathay Pacific was and indeed is owned by an established UK trading family called the Swire Group. that company had very strong values, which it transmitted to Cathay Pacific. Of course, it has a range of businesses, but the values that we had in Cathay Pacific were values primarily based on operational safety, reliability. These are, if you like, technical values. But I think going deeper than that, the company was run with a huge amount of continuity and integrity. And I think these are probably the two key values that we've tried to instill within our people over the years. That people, regardless of the imperatives and exigencies of stock markets and reports and so on and so forth, that a good company needs to look at the long term. And it needs to be able to take long-term decisions. Okay. And, managers and staff need to regard themselves as being in position for the long term. And they need to approach their work, therefore, with a long-term vision and with great integrity to ensure that, they are able to gain the respect of their employees and their colleagues over the long term. And by taking this approach, based, as I say, on long-term continuity and the highest level of integrity, we believe that we have been able to operate the airline to a very high degree of operational and indeed ethical standard. And I think this is what has driven us all to create an organization that has high value, not just in terms of its value as a business, but in terms of the example that it can demonstrate perhaps to other businesses, and to engender the pride that people feel, that our people feel in working for Air Astana. This is absolutely fundamental. We're a service business, and a service business is very people intensive. It also requires people who are of a high degree of intelligence. And the only way that one can attract and retain that quality of people is by having this long-term vision and this great level of integrity, and therefore the sense of pride that all my colleagues feel in working for Air Astana. And I think that is the fundamental reason for and guiding impetus behind the success that we've had up until this point.
And what about the personal life? Values?
Well, we talk about work-life balance, and everybody needs to achieve that. Of course, I mean there is such a thing as burnout, and there is such a thing, and everybody does have families, of course. But I think ultimately, and we try and achieve that, of course, in Air Astana. I mean, obviously, we want people to have a good life outside of Air Astana. But fundamentally, in a business of our nature, we're all on call 24/7, really.
Right.
And therefore, we can never switch off and turn off the telephones and not be involved. We are all ultimately on call at all times for whatever eventuality may happen. So working for an airline, it's a full-time exercise. It is something that is really all-consuming. And I think the families wherein there is somebody who is working in an airline in Air Astana fully understand that. I have a very supportive family, and I know that my colleagues have very supportive families because it is an all-consuming activity. And frankly speaking, it has been for all of the 43 years in which I have been working in the industry. That said, it is a deeply rewarding and enjoyable experience. It's a fascinating industry. It has so many different angles and facets. On the one hand, it is like it's run like a military operation, as it has to be, because it's a highly regulated industry, which it has to be in order to ensure, as far as possible, absolute safety and minimal risks. Though there is really no compromise on that somewhat military nature.
There is no right for mistake.
No, there's no, well, mistakes happen. Mistakes are normal, but mistakes have to be known, they have to be discussed, and they have to be rectified. Okay. This is all part of what we call the just culture in our industry, because anybody makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. The point is to recognize them, report them, and correct them. But it does have to be a military-style operation in order to ensure the integrity of the safety of the operation. And everything follows from that. So you have, on the one hand, this military operation, highly regulated, deeply technical, in order to operate safely and to minimize risk. On the other hand, of course, we have a commercial business. Yeah. And the commercial business ensures that we make sufficient profit to be able to put back into the growth of the business. But I should just stress that the operational safety nature of the business is the core. So that always takes precedence and preference over any activity. So the commercial organization is absolutely crucial, of course, to the business, but it is always dependent on and following on from the operational side of the operation. And that's, of course, what makes the airline industry so time-consuming, so all-consuming, I should say, but also it makes it so fascinating and interesting.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I wish you and entire Air Astana team continued success, smooth skies, and exciting path ahead. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Estelle.
That brings us to the end of this insightful conversation with Peter Foster, President and CEO of Air Astana. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, fly safe and stay inspired.